Hello, everyone, and welcome to the History and Impact of Friends of Lulu panel. I'm Leila del Duca, your host, and I'm here with Heidi MacDonald and Anina Bennett, who had a huge part to play in Friends of Lulu, which is this great nonprofit organization that started in the 90s to help promote more women readers and creators in comics. Their programs actually worked and did a huge thing for comics and women readership. I got into comics, or I'm a woman in comics, and I think the landscape would look so much different without Friends of Lulu. So this is a really exciting learning opportunity for me. I hadn't heard of Friends of Lulu until meeting Anina Bennett a few years ago, and I want more people to know about it because I think it's very important. Before I let Heidi and Anina actually talk,
before you turn us loose.
Yeah, cut us loose.
We'll be like, well, let us tell you a story, kids, about the 1990s.
We were alive and kicking.
Alive and kicking. All right, cool. Well, anyway, I'm going to steal this description of a panel that Pamela Jackson made in a 2019 San Diego panel. The description was, Friends of Lulu was founded in 1993 with the goal of getting more women and girls involved in comics as creators and as readers. And it worked. 30 women meeting in a coffee shop during San Diego Comic-Con turned into a national nonprofit organization. Over the course of 16 years, Friends of Lulu published news, comics, reading lists, and a retailer handbook, established active chapters in 4 cities, organized mentoring programs, panel discussions, and 3 Lulucon conferences, and gave out the annual Lulu Awards and encouraged countless new female fans and talent, such as Jessica Abel and Raina Telgemeier. That's so much. So now, will you two please introduce yourselves and let me know what your role in Friends of Lulu was?
Heidi, do you want to go first?
Sure. So my name is Heidi MacDonald. I am currently the editor-in-chief of The Beat at comicsbeat.com, which is a website about comics news. We run interviews, reviews, news, columns, all about comics culture. So I've been doing that since the early part of this century. But before that, I started out as a comics fandom, I guess, journalist. But yeah, I came up with the idea. I named Friends of Lulu. It wasn't entirely my idea, but I did come up with the name Friends of Lulu. And the early 90s, talking to Anina and Trina Robbins and a couple folks who are actually in the audience, and we decided that it was time to do something, which we'll get to undoubtedly. But yeah, I mean, I'm definitely, I'd say, the co-founder of Friends of Lulu, and I was on the board for quite a few years, and it was I worked really hard, and at the time it sounds like you're just struggling into the void. And so Leila, hearing you say we did all this stuff, I was like, oh, we did? That's cool. Who knew? Nice.
You did.
Yeah, who knew? We'll get into I would credit Heidi with being really one of the main instigators of Friends of Lulu, and we'll get more into how it was actually formed and show you some of the specific things that we did throughout the 90s when we were actively involved, and the organization went on to do more stuff after that. But my name is Anina Bennett. I like to call myself a recovering comic book editor. I used to work at First Comics and Dark Horse Comics and a couple of other publishers. I'm also a writer, and I've done several projects, mainly with my husband, Paul Guinan. We created female action heroes called the Heartbreakers in the late 80s, and did some stories in the 90s with Dark Horse. And we also did a couple of illustrated historical fiction books, Boilerplate and Frank Reed. I'm getting some good use out of my convention banners at home even. And I have a career in a different industry now, but comics kind of has a tendency to suck you in and not let go if you love them. And I still love the medium. And I love doing comics education, and I'm a history nerd. And so this kind of stuff is like, yes, let's talk about all the things. And what you said about the impact of Friends of Lulu, Leila, I think maybe some of us who were there in the early days didn't really sink in until recently. And for me, it was when I was researching a couple of years ago an article that I have yet to write, but I may have a collaborator for it now to help get it done, about Friends of Lulu to try to do something more in depth, to cover the role that it played in history. And at the time, like Heidi said, we were kind of slogging along. Oh, we got this done. We're working all the time. But looking back, it was like, oh, wow, that actually did have an impact. And I remember walking through Emerald City Comic Con specifically, which is a big show in Seattle in the before times. And it was the first year that they had moved all of their artist alley after it got really big onto one floor instead of having it kind of scattered around. And that was my favorite part of the convention, of course, because you could just go there and it was one giant artist alley. And I remember walking through it and going, oh, look at all the different people. Like, conventions used to be so homogenous looking. And I almost started crying on the convention floor because there were women of all different ages. There were people of different colors, different gender orientations, like everything. I mean, not to say there's not still bigotry and issues in the comics industry, but the audience and the professional community has changed massively and the industry is starting to change. So yeah.
Awesome. That's a good lead into one of my questions, which was, what was the landscape back then, or what was the landscape like back then, and how it informed you creating this organization?
Well, I guess I'll handle that, and then Anina, you just chime in with whatever. But there was so few women in comics, and I'll just say this is sort of my life's crusade. I've realized that, and nowadays, obviously, we're very cognizant of issues around race in comics, and issues of gender in comics, and in society. And there is there's such a huge queer influx into comics, and we're seeing so many great, Black cartoonists and Asian cartoonists. But I just want to say overall, I'm very aware of the issues about these groups that are a lot of marginalized groups. So, by talking about women in comics, I don't want it to be like, oh, there's not other things, but I'll just say this is my story. And I think it informs a lot of how other groups are marginalized, because it's such a biggie. And that's maybe something I've learned just over the last few years. So, but anyway, to get back, there were like no women in comics. And when I was coming up in the 80s, and there were, but there was just a handful. Like,
we all knew each other, basically. There were so few women in comics that we all knew each other.
We all knew each other. You could fit us all in one room. And we were also told there were no women in comics. That's the other thing. We were always told there were no women in comics. And
that women didn't read comics.
Women didn't read comics. And that was the big one for me, was that women didn't read comics. And I was told this: women aren't visual. Women can't follow the panels. They don't know how.
Superheroes.
We don't like superheroes. Just all this negative, insanely patronizing, and
ultimately self-defeating, because they were like not taking advantage of a potential audience.
Yeah, and just no girls allowed, and it not in. I always say, these are comics folks, these are writers and artists. It's not like there was macho men, like angry, toxic masculinity, armed and violent. I mean, it was just guys who didn't know how to deal with women, right? Is that fair to say, Anina?
Yeah, in a lot of cases. I mean, I don't want to get too sidetracked on sexual harassment, but there's also a lot of handsiness and that kind of attitude that has persisted to this day in some quarters.
Yes, but that is, it's kind of all the universal things that women have to deal with. But I will say it was just really this super unique kind of aura of just something that women were not included in at all.
And, I think part of it also is that so many people in the comics industry at that time especially had come up through fandom and really didn't have business experience in other industries. And so it had a tendency to just be very parochial, and it's still trying to work its way out of that. I think there are more people who've worked in other industries now, but at the time it was very insular.
Right. And just to compare it, I mean, it's like, of course, all arts are, somewhat male dominated to one degree or another at the time. But, even in the music industry, the women bought records, women sang songs. There was women in music. Like, you couldn't say there weren't women in music. There's women in movies. You know,
Yeah, who would say like women don't watch movies? We're not gonna
don't
make
watch movies. You didn't
that
hear
women might
that.
like, you know?
You didn't hear that. But comics was women don't read comics. And so it was Trina Robbins, who's really the you know, the godmother of all this, really, in so many ways. God bless her, the historian. And she went back and she found all this research, just, you know, not special and wasn't about gender. It was just like circulation figures from the 40s and 50s that showed that 50% of the audience that read comics was girls and women. 50%,
Wow.
sometimes more. So Trina showed this to us, and you know, I saw it and I was just like, what is going, why do, you know, super erasure of, and you know, in Japan they have manga and girls read manga, so something is not right here.
Anina, you have this great PDF that has a bunch of pictures of the very first meeting of Friends of Lulu. Can we look at
Yes.
that now? And can you tell me about like how the first meeting was and how it kind of took off from there?
Well, there were some things so the first meeting that right before we formed the organization happened in a coffee shop in San Diego, which is still called the Cine Cafe, but is now like a store that sells sandwiches and stuff in a convenience store. But it was a whole bunch of women that we have photos of from Jackie Estrada who met there, and then out of that made the decision to form this organization, shared some of our experiences and our concerns. And one of the experiences that a lot of the illustrators and writers were sharing was that they didn't have good paying opportunities to work on the types of material that they wanted to do because the publishing industry was so set in this mindset that only certain types of comics, i.e. superheroes aimed at boys, sell. And so there had been, I think, another meeting at WonderCon before that, Heidi, is that right?
Oh, there was just a brunch. It was kind of an informal brunch.
And one of the things that Trina Trina Robbins did underground comics in the 60s, and she's a huge hero to a lot of us. And it's funny because in the 90s, we were like, in the 80s and 90s, we were like, oh, the 60s, that's so long ago. And women were just like really, you know, like in such a much worse position. And now we're looking back on the 90s and saying the same thing. So all things change and stay the same. Trina, I'm going to share this while I'm talking. There we go. Can everybody see that now?
Yes.
Can you see just that and not my entire desktop?
Yes.
Great. That happened to be on a Comic-Con panel last year. That was really fun.
I want you to tell me how to do that because I have, anyway.
It's a PDF. That's the secret. It's hard to do this with slideshows.
Gotcha.
So there were a couple, you know, like all the stuff we talked about was I think, you know, on all women's minds in the industry. And there was also this phenomenon of booth babes at the time, you know, where publishers would pay women to stand around in scanty outfits to advertise their comics. And you still see that sometimes, but you actually at least see them of both genders now. And at the time it was, I would say, pretty much exclusively women. And there was a cherry Pop-Tart lookalike contest, I think, that got a lot of women like really PO'd, and that was part of what started these conversations.
Yeah, that was what got Trina and I really in a dudgeon. It was at WonderCon, and they had a big party on Saturday night. That was one of the big social events of the con season, and then for the you know, entertainment, they had a cherry Pop-Tart lookalike contest, and cherry Pop-Tart was, you know, a character in a sexually explicit comic. You know, it's
porn character, and that was their entertainment.
Yeah, porn character. Yeah. So Trina and I were, we were we were so angry. I mean, talk about standing there with your arms crossed. But anyway, and after that, we were just like, we got to do something. We got to do something. We have to get our voices heard. And you know, the meeting that Anina was talking about was so great because you know, everybody went around the room, and we had some insanely talented creators there, like Wendy Peeney, and you know, Trina was there, and just, you know, a lot of people, and they just talked about their experiences. And as they spoke, it's like, you know, I can't get work because nobody wants to publish kids comics. Nobody wants to publish this kind of material. And I was like, if we can persuade publishers that women will read and buy comics, we will get them on our side. Whereas if we go in and say we're women, we're here, which is a great message. Don't get, which as Trina's, we could see from this, you know, Trina's very, you know, aggressive illustration. But I was like, let's trick them into doing our work for us by selling more comics.
So yeah, this the illustration here, it was not the logo or mascot that we wound up using. This is I think this is coming out of like Trina's 60s activism days, and I love it, but there are a lot of reasons we couldn't use it. One of which is that we couldn't afford the license Little Lulu.
Yes.
And the bomb was, now I'm like, maybe we should have used the bomb,
Yeah.
but the bomb sends a pretty aggressive message right away. But it's a great illustration, and I'm
But
glad.
and I mean, this is me, this is how I approach things. And, I knew that if we went in like a bunch of angry feminists, which we're certainly justified in doing, that we wouldn't get far. That, like I said, we needed this wedge that we could persuade male publishers that there was an audience, and that and retailers. We wanted to persuade publishers and retailers that by supporting more women creators and readers, they would make more money. So it was very much a, that was always my approach to it. And others had different approaches, which again, were fine. But I knew that if we could prove the economic impact of this, that, it would be who could say no to that. And we got a surprising amount of industry support, I will say.
Yeah, and so that was one of our first projects, was to do a survey, which is not documented in the slideshow, but we did a reader survey to try and gather some of because comics also is notoriously bad at market research as an industry. So so that was an idea that came out of some of these early conversations. And that did start to help prove the case, because otherwise you would tell them women and girls read comics and they'd just be like, no, they don't. So let's take a quick look at the meeting, because these photos are all from, there's Heidi. These photos
Christy
are all
Marks,
from, what's that?
Christy Marks, Roberta Gregory.
Yep, that's Roberta in the foreground, and Christy Marks. And I don't remember all the people in the photos, or don't recognize some of them anymore. But this is in the coffee shop, and I have to thank Jackie Estrada, who's currently the administrator of the Eisner Awards, and was really, really heavily involved in founding Friends of Lulu, because she takes photos all the time at conventions, and if it weren't for her, we wouldn't have these photos. So I have all of her files from Friends of Lulu that we're going to donate to an archive when we decide where the archive is going to go. So here we have Maggie, actually starting on the left, we have Lee Mars, who did a wonderful underground comic called Pudge. I'm hidden in the background. There's Roberta Gregory again. Is that Nina Paley?
It is Nina Paley, yeah.
Who I think, well, we won't talk about that. In the foreground is Kim Yale, who is unfortunately no longer with us. She died of breast cancer quite a while ago. She is not very often credited, but she was the co-creator of Suicide Squad. And she did a lot of work with her husband, John Ostrander. And Friends of Lulu named one of our awards after her, the Kim Yale Award for Best New Talent. She was wonderful.
Yeah, she was really.
And then next to her is Martha, right?
Yeah, that's Martha. Yeah,
that's Martha Thomases, who worked with DC doing marketing and publicity. And if you ever saw DC Comics or Vertigo Comics posters on a TV show in the background in the 80s or 90s, that's because of Martha. Like, I think they did that on Roseanne and a few other shows. And then all the way on the right is Maggie Thompson, who at the time was the editor and I think co-publisher of the Comics Buyer's Guide, which was the big news source for the comics industry pre-internet and pre-social media. And Maggie is still very involved in comics and science fiction fandom. And then I don't remember everyone in this photo, so I'm just going to say more people.
Yeah, it looks like Megan Kelso there, Sarah Dyer, Barb Rausch. That's Megan.
Oh yeah,
Kelso.
Sarah Dyer and Barb Rausch are in the next one. Yeah, so Barb Rausch on the left.
That's sitting next to Sarah Dyer. Oh, I wish I remember. Elizabeth Wattasson.
I think it's Elizabeth, yeah.
Yeah, Elizabeth.
And then Sarah Dyer did a really great anthology comic called Action Girl that was one of the few like really fun girl-oriented series at the time, along with women's comics and some of the stuff that people like Roberta Gregory and Donna Barr and Mary Fleener were doing. And there's Jackie. I had to have a photo of Jackie because she took all the photos.
Yeah.
Can I interject real fast and ask, did you mention a Shelby Sampson, someone in the, Leonard in the panelist
Oh, Shelby was there, but I don't remember which one she is. So she's definitely one of these
It's a
photos.
long time ago now.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, and then this is a photo of us. I think we're holding up our articles of incorporation.
Yes.
That's so now you know why my website is Big Red Hair. I just cut it short recently, but that's so starting on lower left is Cheryl Harris, who is actually an attorney and who was really great with a lot of the sort of organizational stuff. Mimi Cruz, who owned Night Flight Comics in Salt Lake City. Jackie Estrada, Liz Schiller, who was a small press publisher and also very instrumental in a lot of the organizational stuff, Heidi and me. And I was actually able to find a copy of our articles of incorporation online.
Nice, very
Thank you,
nice.
Internet. This is more like what our branding was like. We got Mary Wilshire to do a lot of these illustrations, and she did this grown-up Lulu character. And on the top, that one's actually by Paul Smith, and that is a bumper sticker that we did, basically.
I think we did we do window decals too?
I think so. I don't think I have one of those.
Yeah,
but I haven't gone through all of Jackie's files yet.
Yeah, we did we did the kind of promos that you would do in the 90s, with bumper stickers, window decals.
And buttons.
And buttons, yes. Oh, I should have found mine. I have a bunch of my buttons also, but yeah.
Here to save comics.
Yeah, I have my t-shirt, but that does not fit. Oh well. Oh well.
Yeah, so our message was also comics are for everyone. And so we could, I don't know if we had the word intersectional feminists yet or the phrase, but we were definitely intersectional feminists, or I consider myself. These are some of the mini comics and publications that I think were mostly done by different chapters. The first one on the upper left, the cover is by Joan Hilty, who still edits comics, doesn't draw as much anymore, I think. The yellow one is Donna Barr, and the one on the bottom, I think, was done by the Northern California chapter, and it's sort of a zine on women cartoonists. And Heidi, you mentioned Trina, digging into this kind of history. And if anyone's interested in the history of female women cartoonists and female characters in comics, go look for Trina Robbins's books, because she has done several books on those topics, and she's really
and I mean Trina really, she just fought against this narrative that we're talking about. And I think I mentioned this too, but just in case anybody came in late, my background is this comic strip from the early 40s, I want to say, called Deathless Deer. Is written by Alicia Patterson, whose father was the head of the New York Daily News comic syndicate, one of the most powerful people in comics of the time. So a little nepotism there, but it was drawn by an artist named Nasa McMain, who was a really well-known illustrator. And it's beautiful. I mean, you can see it's like super well drawn, and it's great. And so I would see things like this and just be like, women can't draw it. I'd be like, but they can. Look at that. I mean, now they call it gaslighting. We didn't have that super useful term then, but it was just, gas, man alive. And, Leila, I'm just so grateful that artists like you come up and you're, like women have already been very talented artists, when they weren't allowed to paint or draw, they did arts and crafts, but obviously there was a lot of really talented women. And, I'm just so excited that women cartoonists now and, female identified cartoonists now don't, have so many role models, so that they don't have to answer the question of why are you drawing comics? You don't get that gaslighting, because, like all of these super talented women whose work, Donna Barr, I mean, what a great artist. And, it's like they just, she went and did her own thing. She wouldn't take no for an answer, but you really had to be able to not take no for an answer if you wanted to even be seen in the industry. It was just it was a battle.
Yeah. And I started getting into comics in the early 2000s, so things weren't nearly as progressive as they are like 20 years after I started getting into them. So even during my time in it, I have seen such a change for the better. So it's really cool to have seen like a little bit of a taste of the extent of what you have dealt with sexism in comics and see it change. So I can't even imagine what it must feel like for you to have seen an even broader change.
Feels good.
It does. I mean, seriously, like that story I told earlier was real. I almost broke out into tears on a convention floor from seeing all the different people there, and I was like, wow. And then doing the research on Friends of Lulu and digging into these archives and stuff was what made me see some of the ripple effect that some of this had. So we also have images of some of the newsletters and convention materials and publications that the organization did. So part of the thing about the Lulu theme was that if you've ever read the original Little Lulu comics, there's this whole like boys clubhouse that there's no girls allowed sign on it. So we were the opposite of that. Our newsletter was Lulu's Clubhouse, and it says girls and boys were allowed. And I forgot how much content was in these. This is not literally pre-internet, but this is pre-social media. It was before people could easily share, articles and images, especially. And so this was like a crucial source of information. And I just picked one out of the archives that I have in my house right now.
Nice.
So this one is from May 1998. It's got a thing about an upcoming Lulucon that was the third one that I think didn't happen. But it's got an article by Colleen Duran on promotion for self-publishers. It's got Lulu's upcoming convention schedule. It's got the 1997 Friends of Lulu Award winners announcement. Can you see those names?
Yes. Marie Severin, Trina, Jessica Abel. Wow.
Yeah, Jessica Abel, who was doing Art Babe at the time and now is like a guru to hundreds of other artists. And Marie Severin for the Women Cartoonists Hall of Fame. She was mostly known as a colorist at the time, but she was a really great cartoonist in her own right. We've got a Junior Lulu's page.
Oh, cool.
That was a thing we tried that we didn't really have enough capacity to keep going. We've got chapter news, we've got promotion, and then one of my favorite things is that we actually have a report. I'll have to find who actually wrote this. This is a report from a Japanese Comic-Con.
Nice.
Would not have been able to find that information otherwise.
That's so cool. I have a comment from the panelists, and I think it may have had to do with something earlier we talked about. It says, first big New York City multi-day convention was July 23rd to 24th, 1966. 4 female attendees, Pat Lupoff, Lee Hoffman, Flo Steinberg, and Maggie Thompson. So is that, I think we were talking about
Yeah, well, I mean, there always were women involved in comics. I mean, this really comes down to the concept of erasure, and the more you learn about who's been erased, it's just the madder it makes me. It's Women's History Month, and I'm not a big fan of blank History Month, because every month it's history. It's just freaking history. It's not women, but I get it. I get why we want to spotlight Black history or women's history or Asian American Pacific Islander history or queer history. But there's just the erasure. Jeez Louise, it's just
And I mean, to piggyback off of that, I don't recognize any of these women's names. Like growing up, I wasn't taught who the significant female creators were, and I think that's really sucky.
Well, some of it has to do with, I don't want to get too sidetracked on history either, but Leila, that interview that Paul and I did with you where we talked about the narrowing down of content in the comics industry that happened in the United States, that is there were a lot of factors that led up to that, but because of all these converging factors, the content really got narrowed down to like kid stuff and superheroes for a while. And a big chunk of the audience that Heidi was talking about earlier, which was much more diverse, dropped away. And the audience went from being much more diverse and being much more general, and there being all different genres in comics, to it being an industry that was very narrowly focused and couldn't really survive that way. So the fact that it's starting to branch out and that comics are available in different forms in different places now is healthy.
Yeah. And, another one of my, battles or, causes in my career was graphic novels. And I was always a big proponent of the graphic novel format. And again, it's like this was, Will Eisner, who was a very revered cartoonist, and he was, credited with certainly pioneering certain aspects of the graphic novel format. He wasn't the first, but anyway, not to get sidetracked in history. But anyway, this was a cause that you could get everyone involved in. And it really was the early 2000s when the graphic novel, led by manga and led by the young women, girls, young women who were reading manga, really revolutionized the sales of graphic novels in bookstores, in Borders and Barnes and Noble. Again, just, to ask how I feel, it's like, yes, I saw that once you doubled your audience, your sales boomed. So yeah,
it's not rocket science.
It's not rocket science.
So this is, I want to make sure we have time to talk about the retailer handbook too, because
yes.
Yeah, we have about 15 minutes left.
These are just some convention tables. We would get a table at Comic-Cons. And so this is what Comic-Cons looked like in the 90s. They were much less glitzy than they are now. And so these are just various people at different cons with our traveling Friends of Lulu banners. And this is part of how we did the survey. So we would do survey, we would do, direct outreach to try and grow our membership. We would, talk to publishers at conventions, talk to creators. So there were a lot of different things, and try to sell merch, of course, to help raise money. This is a notice for one of our annual meetings, and I kept this because I found it in my papers, and it has a note from Kim Yale on the back of it.
Oh, nice. Oh.
So yeah, they were staying at the Westgate that year, apparently.
Cool. When @ really just meant @ and not a Twitter handle.
or an email address. Yeah.
Right.
Somebody mentioned in the chat that Cheryl, I think it was Johanna, mentioned in the chat that Cheryl Harris was a sysop for CompuServe. And yes, that is correct. And all of our early communications and many of our early meetings for Friends of Lulu were held on CompuServe. That is how long ago it was.
Yeah.
Okay, here's our retailer handbook. This, I feel like, was a big success story, and I don't think we knew how big of a success story until a few people commented on it, like within the past couple of years, that it changed the way they ran their stores.
Yeah, can I actually read a quote from that amazing Zach Davison letter that he wrote you?
Yeah, did you say you want to read it? Sure, I don't have that pulled up right now.
Yeah, I have the best quote that I thought was from the letter. It says, he said, in regards to this pamphlet and reading it and integrating this stuff into his store, he says, "It worked, absolutely. Word got around. I was in a university area, so local anime clubs started coming in. Kids walking by with their parents would come inside without feeling intimidated. I brought on some women's staff as well, hiring one of my regular customers to help out. The whole shop was just a nice place to be on a day-to-day basis. I kept growing with new customers, and the old customers, they kept coming." And this is kind of after he describes what the handbook taught him how to change his shop, going from the typical comics cave, dark, unfriendly, kind of scary and unfriendly towards women specifically, and making like more light come in the windows, putting the whatever porn or explicit material stuff in the back. So I'll let you guys talk about your own thing from here.
Just to be clear, I think he had bought the shop from someone else, so I don't think he had a horrible comic shop.
Yeah.
But yeah, like some of the chapter titles are Chapter 1, Why Sell to Women, Parents, and Children. Chapter 2, Doesn't She Know This Is a Comic Shop? Or How to Treat Customers. Chapter 3, Presenting the Product. Chapter 4, Beyond Wonder Woman, Choosing Product for Women and Children. Chapter 5, Marketing Your Store to Your Community. Like, it's basic stuff, but again, a lot of people got into the industry because they're fans, they love comics. That's why a lot of us did. And, and that's not how comic shops were being operated for the most part at the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and also I'm wondering if most shops weren't really thinking about the marketability and like the design of their stores too. Am I wrong in thinking that? Maybe I just wasn't in shops.
So I think people who have been in comics retail have always been super passionate, and that's why they got in, passionate about comics, and that's a great thing. But I do think a lot of their stores were the refuges for their own personal interests and what they liked. It was man cave or clubhouse, like somewhere in between there. And we did talk to retailers, and during the 90s, the biggest property was The Simpsons. It was the hottest thing out there, and there were Simpsons comics being published, and I would be like, why don't you put The Simpsons in your window? and then like a retailer would say, yeah, I put the Simpsons comic in the window, and all of a sudden I got all kinds of people coming in. So it was, if you love Batman, which everybody loves Batman, I understand you wanted to make your Bat Cave, but if you're a business, you need to make it much more available and welcoming to more audiences. I think Ani and I specifically remember, I forget who said this, but I wish I did, because it was at one of our meetings, and it was actually a guy who was a retailer, and he said, putting a poster of Batman in the window of a comic shop is like, a cathedral putting a window sign out that says Catholics welcome here.
Maybe that was Rory. That sounds like something Rory wrote.
Yeah, right? Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And a lot of us had those kinds of experience walking into comic shops. I mean, I went into a comic shop in Chicago in, I don't know, like the 1980s at some point. And it was disorganized. It was hard to find what I was looking for. The guy who I asked a question to wasn't helpful at all. And I just felt really uncomfortable, and I never went back. And then I found a service called Westfield Comics that I could order my comics from at the same time the comic shops did. And then that was it. Like, I should say most comic shops are much better than that now. And that is another positive change in the industry. But at the time, this handbook was like real news to a lot of people. And I have to say, Diamond Comics really helped us out. Actually, they helped distribute some of these materials to make sure that they actually got to retailers. And they gave us like free full-page ads and did a supplement, a reading guide supplement with us and everything. So Diamond may have their issues as a distributor, but they were a big help to Friends of Lulu.
I just want to say, like, that's super. I'm so glad you said that, because we got a lot of support from the power structures of the comic book industry.
Yeah, we had to go ask for it. I mean, don't get us wrong.
Yeah, but I mean, once we gave our sales pitch, it was hard for them to say no. We really made it hard for people to say no to us by emphasizing how everyone would benefit from this. And so Diamond, really, there was a really great guy, Todd Scott at Diamond, who really helped us out a lot. I think that was his name, Todd Scott. And he definitely made sure that everything that we wanted to do got to Diamond and got to the right people. And, they distributed this to stores for free. And, that was really great.
Yeah. And, within Friends of Lulu, in the membership and in the organization's activities, we had people who worked professionally in the comics industry and people who didn't, but who loved comics. So it was kind of, bifurcated in a way between, and that was also, we had this enormous mission that we had set for ourselves to try to change the comics industry, get publishers to change what they were publishing and what audiences they were focusing on, get more girls and women to read comics, and promote women creators in comics. So like, that's a lot. I'm amazed we managed to get any of it done.
I know, right? But I do think it was like we were so focused on it, and you know what? No one else was.
Yeah.
I
think making the business case really helped, and a lot of that came out of the fact that a number of people on the early boards and who did a lot of the early organizing work worked in those kind of professional roles. Some of them had been publishers, worked at publishers. Jackie had been working with San Diego Comic-Con for a long time. There's also, I don't think she was publishing yet, but she had worked in publishing. So a lot of that knowledge went into trying to approach it this way, to try and make the case to publishers and retailers, as well as creating community.
I just got a comment from Austin. Hi, Austin. He says, this panel is fantastic. Leila, Heidi, and Anina. Loved all the past photos. Will there ever be a book published covering the history and impact of Friends of Lulu?
That is my hope. Heidi knows that I did a bunch of research in 2019 and was like, I'm going to write an article. And then I got too busy and I didn't write it. But I really would like to do that. And there's somebody in the audience who I may be collaborating with to try and get the article done. And I think we have enough archival material that we could do a book. It would just be a matter of how we are going to publish it, basically.
Yeah. Awesome. And I mean, that would be great. And, look, we did a lot of things wrong too. I'm not trying to say there wasn't, there was squabbles and everything, but, we all had a vision for something that was so overwhelmingly positive and needed in the industry, that really brought a lot of people together. And I mean, you know, like even those photos of the first meeting, it's like you could not get some of those people in the same room together. You know, that was the first time they'd all come together. So that was how important it was at that time. And I guess, you know, like looking at activism now with social media, I mean, it's a lot more like Trina's drawing of Lulu with the mom. You know, I think people are super confrontational about things, and that's, like I said, that's absolutely necessary and needed. And you know, so I feel like we kind of had this stealth message that we were, you know, it's like when you put the pill in the food for the cat, you know, they don't need, they're eating, they don't know they're taking their medicine. So you know, and I think there's room for both, and you know, there's still a lot of erasure. There's still this can, so you know, I guess I'm like Trina. You know, in my youth, I was more like, I was the negotiator, right? And now I'm just like, this can happen again. You have to be very vigilant. You have to be aggressive about it, and you can't let things slide. That's true.
And we have to keep recovering history too. I think that's the other thing.
Yes, we must recover the history because that is, you know, that is front and center.
Let me run through. I know we have to end soon, but there's one slide at the end that you guys have to see.
Yeah, we have like 1 minute.
So this is just an ad from Comics Buyer's Guide for a reading guide that Diamond put out as a supplement for us. These are various things from the Lulu Awards. Carla Speed McNeil was also on the nominee list for Best New Talent. She does an amazing series called Finder, which you should go find right now if you've never read it. That's John Ostrander, Kim Yale's husband. This is stuff from Lulucon, and I think Lulucon, actually, we could do a whole thing on Lulucon.
Oh yeah, we should totally do a whole thing.
Because this was covering, the ones that actually happened were covering topics like how to get libraries to stock graphic novels, how to get graphic novels in bookstores, how to make your shop more family friendly, like all the kind of stuff.
Oh my God, we are so ahead of us. Yeah, I just want to point out, by the way, just in the photo at the bottom, right as I'm looking, that guy in the red shirt, that's Todd Scott from Diamond. Yeah, says Todd Scott. So he was like, he really helped us out. He really opened a lot of doors from us at Diamond. And I, you know, just want to call out his efforts because he really went above and beyond.
And I think this is Elia Carson, right, from Meltdown Comics?
That's right. That's Elia, the co-owner of Meltdown Comics. Yeah,
so she was really active in there was a Southern California and LA chapter. And that's Jan Utstein O'Neill.
Yes.
I do remember some people. Yes,
Jan works at Marvel Studios Finance now. You'll see her name in the credits of all the Marvel movies.
These are some of the publications that Friends of Lulu did that were more like comics anthologies. This was a little after my time. And then this is what I had to show at the very end. I'll give everyone a second to read this because this is from, was this from Spin Magazine or Rolling Stone?
I think it was. No, Spin. It was.
So this is a cartoon strip from 1990, whatever, written by Larry Doyle and illustrated by the great cartoonist Kyle Baker, who lampoons himself in this. And it's them at Comic-Con at a time when like people were just starting to find out about San Diego Comic-Con outside of the industry and fandom. And this is them stopping by the Friends of Lulu table. And it's like, perfect. That's our message. Don't have the porno stuff right in front.
You can, have the porno stuff. That's not what we know. You know, don't say that. Just, you know, have it not in the front of the store. And, you know, I want to say, when you showed these slideshows, you know, I designed the Friends of Lulu logo in a quick second in Microsoft Paint on my computer with 40 megs hard drive. And because somebody needed to do, I was working at Disney at the time. And so I am not a graphic designer. And I want to say it holds up pretty well. Every time they show it, I'm like, you know, that logo, it's not half bad.
Not bad. Well done, Ace.
Well, we are totally out of time. I wish we weren't. There's still so much I wanted to cover, but we'll have to get to it at another time. I want to thank the audience. You guys have been great. And Heidi, Anina, thank you so, so much. This was awesome. I love hearing you talk. I started tearing up multiple times and like, down. I just thank you so, so much. Again,
Well,
Don't
thank
think-
you.
Thank you, Leila,
being-
for
yeah.
organizing. I got to give Leila all the credit for the bulk of the credit for organizing this whole mini con.
Yeah,
You're
it's
amazing.
fantastic.
And thank you to the audience for coming and, spread the word about Friends of Lulu. And there will be more information published eventually.
Mhm.
Excellent.
Yes. And,
Cool.
keep on finding the hidden history.
Yes. Cool. Thank you again, everyone. I'm going to leave this meeting abruptly because I have to get off to the next panel. But yeah, thank
Okay.
you. Have a great
All
day.
right. Thank you for coming, everyone. Thank you.
Heidi, what's your background? I missed it.
Oh, it is a panel from Deathless Deer, a comic strip that ran briefly in the New York Daily News by Alicia Patterson and Nasa McMahon, some forgotten women.
Nice.
And it's Nasa McMahon was a really well-known illustrator, so it's actually a really beautiful comic strip. But not a lot of people talk about it. So